I call this meeting of the City Council Finance Committee to order. Madam Clerk.
Order number 1, that the following named sum be in the same is hereby transferred as the same was submitted by the mayor as follows. Transfer of $1,500,000 from overlay surplus to the law department court judgments.
Councilor Thompson. Sorry, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to take agenda item number 4 out of order and hear that matter first. This is the holiday celebration and parade resolve. We have a few guests invited this morning. I anticipate the first few agenda items to be a little long, and I want to have an opportunity for them to speak before we get into all of that. I've spoken with the invited guests. They said they'll make it quick.
Second.
Motion is properly made and seconded to take item 4 out of order. All in favor? All opposed? The motion passes. Madam Clerk, sorry about that.
Item 4, resolved. Be it resolved that Mary Walden of the Downtown Brockton Business Association and Amanda Glennon, chairwoman of the Brockton Holiday Celebration and Parade, or their designees, be invited to come before the Finance Committee to discuss the Brockton Holiday Celebration and Parade to be held on Saturday, November 26, 2022. Invited Mary Walden, Amanda Glennon, chairwoman.
Good evening. Sorry to
Good
interrupt
evening,
the hat
councilors.
handout.
We are getting, I have to put mine on first. Thank you. And I have some, I would call them elves, but I don't know if we're going to call them elves or not. So good evening. As promised, I will stay nice and quick for all of you. Unfortunately, Santa is working hard up in the North Pole, and he's unable to make it. My understanding is Ms. Claus is supposed to be coming in, and may be coming in. But before we even get further with that, first, as the Downtown Brockton Association, we want to first acknowledge the Veterans Parade that is being held. It's hard to talk about the holiday parade when there's one important parade before us, and the Veterans Parade, and we as a Downtown Brockton Association supports that parade. So, and of course the veterans who are involved. Just again, that is November 11th at 10 a.m. The other part is in your packet, you have a few things that I just want to bring attention to. First, to my right is Ms. Amanda Glennon. Amanda works for the NeighborWorks, and I've had the pleasure, if you have seen any social media from the Downtown Brockton Association, this is all this young, talented woman who's been able to not only put videos together, but jingles and fun and everything else that goes along with it. Now, mind you, these shoes do not fill the shoes of someone who's been doing the parade for 35 years. And yep, the gentleman behind me is John Marion, of course you all know, but it does take a lot of work. A lot of volunteers, and particularly this is going to be the first year since COVID that we've had a full parade with school participation and businesses and vendors. So again, in your packet, there's a whole itinerary, what we're planning on doing. It's only a draft. There's going to be 4 locations. So first location's here at City Hall, the mayor's office, and Kim Sun and Marcy, who are organizing kids' activities that are happening here from 9:30 to 12:30. They'll be just in the basement. Santa will be in the basement, and there'll be a photographer taking pictures. But then there will also be some crafts that will be for families. The Garden Club, the African American Association, and the Council on Aging will be there. The second location is going to be right behind the amphitheater here, and it's going to be a vendors. It's going to be merchants and small businesses and entrepreneurs right in the little bit of the alleyway behind where the dumpster is. That's going to be a great location for people just to kind of homegrown activities and Brockton-owned businesses, but also those coming from the area. Behind that, at the Old Colony Elder Services parking lot, will be our food court, and we have thanks to you and to the council with the new food truck process. We are having about 11 have signed up so far, and they're still coming. We received the approval from the two businesses, Elvera's and Brockton Beer, because there's 200 feet within, and they gave us permission that it's so close, so we're going through that process. It works. So that will be the food court. And then the library, Brockton Public Library, is having a number of activities, including a planetarium, inflatable planetarium. So we are still in the process of how do we get things and people here and there, but it's all here in downtown. Behind me also is the Traffic Commissioner Mark Picaro, Captain Picaro, who's been at every one of our meetings and helping us out and rethinking about how we're going to be doing things. But the fire department, the public properties and building department, DPW, Parks Department, BEMA, Parking Authority, it's been really, from the public participation, an incredible assistance to us. And of course, the Brockton Public Schools, they all wore their hats. So if you're not wearing your hat, I highly recommend, because they wore their hat when I came before the school committee, Mr. President. And
Box lunch, too.
as you know, we have 26 schools in the school system, and we've reached out to all. We're reaching out to community groups, the Latino Women's Group, with NAACP, and everybody and anybody that we can. But as you all know, trying to communicate in the city has some difficulties, and really reaching out. So if you do know of any community group, Cape Verdean Association is coming, and I know that they're participating in the parade. There's a lot of people and a lot of things that we need to do. So a couple things. In your packet, we are still accepting nominations for parade marshal. We have 13 nominees so far, but we're looking just to have a robust participation. And Amanda, since I've been doing all the talking, is there anything else you would like to add?
I would just ask for everyone, if you could please share with your networks or folks that you may know who might be interested in volunteering. We can never have enough volunteers, either during the planning process or on the day of. The more volunteers we have, the safer we can keep things, and make it a great day for families here in Brockton and around. That's my big ask.
Thank you. Councilors? Councilor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, ladies, Ms. Waldron and Ms. Glennon. This is going to be exciting, this holiday parade, and I guess the theme of this year's holiday parade is that we're back together again for the holidays. And, you know, that's so great to hear after what our country's gone through over the last few years. So the fact that we can all get back together and have a full celebration this November, it's going to be a great time. So I want to thank you, Mary, and you, Amanda, for the amount of work you've done to putting this holiday celebration together. You started very early, and it's been really moving along. The Zoom meetings have been informative. I feel like every meeting, you know, we're checking boxes, and we're getting closer to an amazing event, and it's going to be because of the work that you two put into this, and it's so appreciated. I just have two quick questions, well, three actually. So do we have any understanding right now of how many floats are going to be in the parade? Do we have a number on that? What, as it stands today, what would that be?
We have about 6 right now.
Six.
6 floats. Plenty of other participants,
Like
marching
bands.
bands,
Okay.
different groups, community groups, dance performances.
Okay, great. And then you mentioned that the deadline has been extended to nominate a parade marshal. How would one nominate a parade marshal?
So we do have a nomination form. There's information about it in your packet, but after tonight's meeting, I'm going to follow up with an email that will include a way for folks to do it online, but also for folks to do it on paper if they're more comfortable doing it that way.
Okay, and then we'd put some sort of, you know, again, a social media type of PDF or something that we could post that out so that people could respond and nominate who they believe would make a good parade marshal. And then lastly, I know I asked this question to you, Mary, and I know we haven't really drilled down to it, but do we now know what number year is this for?
No.
Okay,
and
perfect.
Thanks to the historian of the parade, Mr. Marion informed me, this is our 35th year. So we skipped a year with COVID. So last parade was in 2019, 2020, there was nothing. And then 2021, we did a partial parade with just public safety. It was probably the fastest parade I think anyone has participated in, and unfortunately, it was 40 miles an hour wind and about 20 degrees. But we are going to keep our rosary beads out, as Mr. Marion had told me that that's what we should all be doing. But in the meantime, you know, the day of, and again, working with Brockton Emergency Management and the Police Department, it will be, you know, if anything is called, it'll be called that morning, and, but otherwise, the parade goes on.
Right, and from the planning and the understanding of what's going to happen that day, I think it's going to be the best out of the previous 33 years of holding this parade. I see that Mrs. Claus has arrived, so I'd like to welcome Mrs. Claus to Council Chambers. Thank you.
Mr. Clerk, as our parliamentarian, do we rise for Mrs. Claus?
I mean, you can, I don't mind, you can rise, you can bow.
So Ms. Claus assists Santa during the photos, was helping out last year, and again, a volunteer. I do not have a Ms. Claus outfit, but I do have an elf outfit, which, again, it's been used a couple times over, but this is all about having fun, and it's about bringing your inner child out, whether you are 80 years old or whether you are 2 years old. And I think that's the point, you know, for many of you who went to Tower Fest, what a wonderful event that was. That was to see the families enjoying and participating. It was just outstanding, and we want to do a repetitiveness of that kind of fun. But I also am regretful to say thank you, Council and Mayor Sullivan, for putting a line item in the budget to help this. A parade costs 18 times more that. And by having that bit of the resources that you put in, it does help us to be ahead of the schedule. There's some vendors that need to be paid in advance, and we can't get that all the time. But we really want to appreciate all the support that you've given the DBA, the holiday parade, Santa, Mrs. Claus, the elves, but particularly John Marion. 35 years of doing a parade and taking the helm. I've been at this for a year and a half, and my interim presidency is still interim, but I am looking and rebuilding and looking and connecting with the different businesses, not only in downtown, but within our region.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, and I know it's going to be a great event. And again, that's Saturday, November 26th, and the parade starts at 10 a.m.
The parade starts at 1 p.m.?
Oh, 1 p.m.
That's okay.
Okay.
So I've just to do a quick review. The events themselves, City Hall opens up at 9:30. The rest of the vendors and the food and activities at the library start at 10. The parade steps off at 1.
Okay.
You as elected officials and other elected officials will be marching together. It starts at Main and Belmont, and then goes up Main Street, up Legion Parkway, down Legion Parkway, down Center Street, then onto Montello, and then we'll be back to City Hall for a tree lighting with the mayor, approximately around 3:30, and then that's what we're doing.
Well, it's going to be a great event. I welcome all residents of Brockton or any other resident in the area who really wants to have a great time with family, celebrate the Christmas season. Please come out and join us. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you, Mrs. Claus.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Anybody else, counselors, or is there a motion?
I motion to recommend favorably to the full City Council.
Motion has been properly made and seconded. All in favor? All opposed? The motion passes.
Thank you.
Merry early Christmas. Thank you.
Agenda item 1, ordered that the following named sum be, and the same is hereby transferred as the same was submitted by the mayor as follows. Transfer $1,500,000 from the overlay surplus to Law Department court judgments. Invited Megan Bridges, City Solicitor, Tori Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer.
Mr. Clarkson, Madam Solicitor. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. The council president asked me to just give, for purposes of edification for the councilors and for the public who may be watching, just a brief explanation of what the overlay is and how that money is obtained. So each year, when you are contemplating and voting the operating budget for the city, in that budget order, which is the actual budget for the city, there's a line included in there that you vote each year, and that is we appropriate money into what's called the overlay fund. That fund exists for one purpose, and that is to pay out abatements and exemptions. And so if someone files for a property tax abatement for their property, that amount is paid out of the overlay fund. And so that money exists so that when we give someone an abatement on their taxes, it doesn't take away from the tax levy or the amount that we use to fund the budget. This year, you put $1.4 million into that overlay fund. The last 5-year average for money expended out of that overlay to fund exemptions and abatements was $1.3 million. So we put money in, and then it comes back out. But money that's not spent stays in that overlay fund, and it accumulates from year to year, unless and until, by a vote of the Board of Assessors, excess money is taken out. When that occurs, the Board of Assessors votes to place money in what's called overlay surplus. So that's an account separate from the overlay account that represents the money that's voted, that's no longer needed for abatement and exemption purposes, and that money sits in a separate fund. When that occurs, that money can be used for any municipal purpose. So recently, the Board of Assessors did vote at the request of the mayor, based on money that was no longer needed to fund abatements and exemptions. The board voted to release $1.5 million from overlay to overlay surplus, and a transfer of those funds is what's before you tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Clarkson. Councilors, statements, questions, motions. Councilor Nacastro.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for being here. That was a very good explanation. So having moved 1.5 million, what is the balance now in the overlay account?
Just a minute. $1,413,926.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, Mr. Clarkson. So, Mr. Clarkson, I think out in the public sphere, there's a misconception as to what the tax overlay surplus account is. There's been, suggestion that the surplus account comes from an over-collection of taxes, that it's a tax surplus be refunded to the residents. Can you just clear up that misconception of what the overlay surplus account is? This is not a surplus of taxes that we over-collected. Is that correct?
That is most certainly correct. I've been in local government in one form or another for about 30 years now, and overpayment of taxes. Unless you buy a new car, and overpay on your excise and then get a refund, I don't know of a circumstance under which that occurs. So, again, this money is placed into this account on an annual basis by the city council as part of the budgeting process. So the overall budget that you vote each year includes an amount that is intentionally placed in overlay, and then is refunded back to taxpayers when they file for abatements, or if they qualify for one of the several exemption categories that exist.
Okay.
So it's money that is appropriated by the legislative body specifically for the purpose of sending it back to taxpayers.
So the nomenclature of surplus could be misleading as to the actual, where this funding is coming from. It's not a over-collection of taxes, which are surplus taxes.
That's correct. It is not. But that term overlay surplus is not unique to Brockton. That's a term that's used by the Department of Revenue. The chairman of the Board of Assessors did provide you with some guidelines from the Department of Revenue. If you really want to know even more about overlay, there's a packet there for you to do some nighttime reading.
I'll dig right into that. Thank you, Mr. Clarkson. Thank you for clearing that up. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselors, comments, questions, motions? Motion to move favorable.
Motion to recommend favorably back to the full city council.
Second.
Motion has been properly made and seconded to move this favorably back to the full city council. On the motion, Counselor Farwell?
On the motion, I know nothing about the court case or the settlement, and frankly, it's always been my experience in government that when you negotiate a settlement, you go into executive session and you have a presentation by the city solicitor. I believe we did that in the case of Mr. Lopes. And then, obviously, when the executive session is through, there are minutes that are released, and it indicates what transpired. So you still have full transparency, but I think the actual negotiation and the reasons for doing this are something that all of us should know. So I mean, I
I'll
won't
withdraw
make
my motion,
Try
but
your motion?
Yes.
I'll withdraw my motion.
So,
I'll make a motion to go into executive session.
Second.
motion to enter executive session has been properly made and seconded. All in favor of entering executive?
but it has to be, I believe, by a roll call
roll
vote.
A roll call vote.
And I think we, forgive me, I think we have to announce the specific purpose and that we will be coming back from executive session, so.
If you want to go into executive session, you can read it.
Okay, so I will read off the exact language that we've got. First one, second one. You wanna make sure I get
I'll read
this
it here. So the executive session would be to discuss matters relating to active litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares. An executive session requires a simple majority vote.
And, Mr. Chairman, can we just confirm that this was publicized?
This
That-
was
that-
publicized.
Okay.
So we received our agendas, they were sent to our houses and posted online, and then the agenda was amended to put the proper language into it. So the folks at home, the agendas there, and the agendas online are all properly labeled. Ours are just missing that little piece of language.
Understood.
It was re-emailed. Thank you, Madam Clerk. All right, motion's been properly made and seconded. This is a roll call vote. Madam Clerk?
So this is a vote to go into executive session. Azak,
Yes.
Giagostino,
Yes.
Farwell,
Yes.
Lally,
Yes.
Minicello,
Yes.
Nicastro,
Yes.
Yes.
Rodriguez, Tavares,
Yes.
Texera,
Yes.
Thompson.
Yes.
That's 10 in the affirmative.
The chair has determined that the discussion of this agenda item in open session may have a detrimental effect on the litigation position of the public body. Under Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21, the City Council may move to executive session. The purpose and subject of the executive session is with respect to the transfer of $1.5 million from overlay surplus to the Law Department court judgments. Folks at home, when we're going to go into executive session, when executive session ends, we will be returning to the public televised recorded session.
Thank you.
We will be right back. Councilors, we are back in. Is there a motion?
Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to motion to send this order back favorably to the full city council.
Second.
Motion has been recommended, motion has been properly made and seconded to recommend this favorably to the full city council. All in favor? All opposed? The motion passes.
Item number 2, ordered that the city council authorizes the acceptance and expenditure of the total grant funds in the amount of $157,300 from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, FY23 Commonwealth's Municipal Vulnerability Program. 2, Planning and Economic Development Department, FY23 Commonwealth's Municipal Vulnerability Program Fund. These grant funds will be used to prepare 30% design documents and drawings for a nature-based flood control measures along Trout Brook in furtherance of the Trout Brook Urban Renewal Plan. This grant will require a local match of $54,000. Invited, Rob May, Director of Planning and Economic Development, Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer, Chike Odanuki, City Engineer, Julianne Bass, Fuse and O'Neill, Dean Audette, Fuss and O'Neill.
Good evening,
Mr. Chairman.
CFO, Mr. Director.
Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Farwell.
To my colleagues, as you know, we received an email today from our city engineer who suggested that he would be in a position of perhaps refuting or rebutting some of the information that Fuss and O'Neill would present. I have not had a chance to talk with him. I would like a chance to talk with our city engineer, and I'm just throwing this open. Is there any sentiment to postponing this to allow councilors to obtain information from the city engineer's office? If there is, I'd make that motion. If there isn't, I'm perfectly prepared to go forward. It's entirely up to the body.
Counselor, if I may, we did just make him sit out here for an hour. So if there's something we can get from him, you know.
Well, I admire your sympathy, and it's entirely up to the group.
Councilors, I hear no second to any motion.
Second for the sake of discussion.
Motion's been properly made and seconded to postpone. All in favor? All opposed? Postponement fails. Mr. Director, Mr. CFO, whichever one of you would like to take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll attempt to provide a little texture to this item. You did discuss it at your last meeting and asked to have some more information to be discussed tonight. And there are other officials here, including the city engineer, to be able to answer your questions. In addition to the brief overview I provided you in my email, I thought I would just give a little history of this grant and the program that it supports. The Municipal Vulnerability Program was an initiative of the Baker administration that actually started here in Brockton under Mayor Carpenter, and was a grant that was applied for by the then grant writer in the mayor's office, who is now a financial analyst in my office. It was done collaboratively between the mayor's office, the Office of Planning and Economic Development, and the Department of Public Works. And so that grant was received, and Fuss and O'Neill has done some work under that grant. This grant money is proposed to continue what is a widespread attempt to take a look at some of the areas that are subject to flooding in the city. This focuses on a particular area, but the work that Rob and the DPW have done will eventually focus on a wider area. Last time we discussed this, Rob discussed briefly that there may be additional money from the federal government that will satisfy the city's required match of $54,000. Some of you attended a ceremony that was hosted by the United States Environmental Protection Agency last week, and that money that will be before you at a future meeting the city intends to use for the match for this grant. I thought that was important to lay that out so that we all understand that these grants are working in concert with one another, and we're able, through the hard work of Rob and my team and the DPW working collaboratively together, to stack some of these grant awards on top of one another to be able to support a wider array of activities. I think, as Councilor Farwell mentioned at the last meeting, and that the mayor has stated publicly, he encourages informed dissent and engagement from all members of the team. And I'm happy tonight to represent him in saying that this is a collaborative effort amongst departments. And so we're here to answer any questions you have.
Mr. Clarkson, thank you. Mr. President, I thought you did a very good job of summarizing the length and breadth of this program, starting back in the Carpenter administration, moving through the next two mayors, including Mayor Rodriguez and Mayor Sullivan, to get us to this point here. We have an opportunity to accept both state and federal funds to advance a project that will eliminate flooding in a very specific neighborhood. It obviously is not the entire city, and that is something that the planning department, the city engineer, DPW, we're all working together with Woodhall to prepare a citywide model to study all of those areas. But the opportunity that is in front of us now is what's at hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Thompson, followed by Nicastro, followed by Farwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, Mr. May, and again, good evening, Mr. Clarkson. So, you know, we kind of discussed last week, you know, exactly what this grant is for. It's a 30% design to help reduce the flooding in that Trout Brook area, where we discussed that 21 properties are in the flood zone and at high risk of being property damage and flooding in the 2, 10, and 100-year storms. And so I know you mentioned that Brockton is also undergoing a more comprehensive flooding model by Woodwall. When that flooding model comes out, there is time to implement or add into this design phase any issues that are brought up through the Woodwall model, correct? I mean, all these things can be done cohesively and in conjunction with each other, that if Woodwall, who's taken a larger look at the flooding issues in Brockton, say, well, wait a minute, if we do something in this Trout Brook area that would help flooding, say, downstream, you know, that's going to be taken into account during this design phase, so that even though there are future flooding models to be done in Brockton, that doesn't mean that this is going to be some sort of separate design that's not informed by a larger model. Is that correct?
That is correct. We have been working on parallel tracks, but we would never want to be in a situation where we were doing work that has to be negated later on. You can see that in our dual tracks on several projects that we're undertaking in the city. They just advance at their same pace.
Right, and I guess you know, there was some confusion as to whether DPW and planning and the mayor's office were kind of all on board or all work together, you know, to request this grant. And I know Mr. Clarkson kind of just answered that question, that this has been a group effort. You know, each department has been informed about the process and the need for this grant. And so, you know, I'm glad you were able to clear that up. I'm in support of this grant. I think that this, in conjunction with the SNEP grant that was just awarded to the city a few weeks ago, can really address some of the flooding issues in Trout Brook, because don't forget, we're also trying to develop Trout Brook into an economic residential zone. And so maybe right now only 21 properties are in the flood zone, but if we develop that area as we have our master plan, many more properties would be in that flood zone. So this is kind of a prerequisite into further developing the Trout Brook area. And so I'm glad that we were awarded this grant, the SNEP grant as well, so that we can address some flooding issues in this area and make it more viable for economic development in the future. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Nicastro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm very pleased that Mr. Otonukwe is here. Mr. Otonukwe, I would ask you to come forward to one of the seats, because I just had a few questions for you following our conversation at the last FinCom meeting. Thank you. And just to quickly recap, we discussed, yes, of course, it's all a team effort, the whole city, and it is one body of water. That all being said, we discussed how the Fuss and O'Neill study identified areas in Ward 4, okay, the southern side of the city, as being the highest and greatest priority. And at that time, there was testimony that you decided to go with Trout Brook as being the focus of this grant and the application for these funds. And I am very glad that these funds were obtained, but at the same time, I'd just like to know, why was the priority given to the Trout Brook area and not to the area in the south side of the city?
The priority is not given to any area.
I'm sorry?
I said priority is not given to any area. There's another study that is going on, which is doing the whole city. Because what was done before didn't do enough.
Yes.
That is why I didn't want it implemented. But there's a site we studied in, what's the name? There's a particular site that has been, some design has been done in that area, that we can start work. The area we are talking is a little bit upstream of that. And they're going to do only 30%. By the time they are done, by the time it's implemented, the overall city study would have been done. And any adjustment can be done with whatever study they did now, because the city's money is not going to be involved in any shape or form. So the study they are doing now can go on while we are doing the overall study. After the reverse study is done, they may not do as much work to protect the area for flood. So whatever they are doing will not negate the overall study that is going on.
Okay, so in so many words, you're saying that the work that's done on the north side of the downtown in this Trout Brook area will benefit the south side?
It will benefit the south, but when we do the overall study, which Woodhull is doing for us, and at no cost to the city, they will do a more thorough study that will give us the best solution to overall city problem. The study we did before, I wouldn't recommend implementing it, because I believe we'll have something better when we do the whole city together.
And can you foresee applying for these funds again? At the ceremony that was held last week, which I did attend, they talked about how several of the recipients of funds last week actually had reapplied. They were receiving funds for a second or a third time, which is swell. Would you foresee us applying for these funds again to benefit the south side of the city?
Yes, because of the infrastructure legislature went through in Washington, a lot of funds are available for grant, for this type of grants. Not only for MVP, they are for other infrastructure, the drainage and the rest of, there are a lot of funds coming down the pike. If we can get the Woodhull study done fast enough, if they can do the, then when we are applying for grants, we know we are going to the final solution, not grant for the sake of grant.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Azak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Mr. Engineer. I just have a couple of questions. I'm not sure who can answer them. I'm going to put it out there. I have always supported grants. I don't think we should ever turn a grant away. I think we're grateful for them. They help us get work done here in the city. But I would like to see some sort of a confirmation, or I don't know if Mr. May or Chike, if you can guarantee us that we need to get the work done in the other parts of the city. I know Councilor Nicastro just went over Ward 4, but Belmont Ave, Poplar Road, Westgate Mall, I mean, we have flooding. I get constituent complaints, all the time about flooding. So can we have a plan? I know, she asked if we were going to apply for some of these other grants, but we need a plan, and I want to hear that from you gentlemen.
What Woodhull is doing for us
I'm
is
sorry.
a lot more than, what Woodhull is doing, study they are doing for us. The cost is true for the city. But I don't think that if anybody does it for us, we'll pay less than $1 million for the study they are doing for us. So as soon as they get that done, we'll have, the base to start tackling the problem.
So I thank you for coming up, Mr. May. So do we have a timeline? Do we know how, what are we looking at? How many years, how much time are we looking at? Because I think this flooding affects the quality of life issues of our residents. So this is something that I think we really should be working on, making it our priority.
It's a priority. Because they are doing this, I'll call them and find out when they are still collecting information.
Okay.
It's after they collect information, they will start analyzing and modeling.
But when you say collecting information, are we just collecting it for the Trout Brook area, or, I mean, that's what?
For the whole city.
Everything.
For the whole city.
Okay, the whole
Because
city.
if you are doing drainage, if you don't do it global, you are sort of wasting your time.
Okay.
Because you don't know where the problem is coming from. But if you deal with it where the problem is coming from, you find out that the flood in other areas will not happen.
Okay. I mean, I put my faith in you gentlemen. You're here, that you do this every day, and I just want to make sure that, I stress the concerns of my colleagues. This is about, the whole city. So I just want to make sure that we, that we're working together for the whole city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have anything to add, Mr. Mayor?
No, well, yes. Chike and Megan Shave have been the primary contacts with Woodhull. Megan Shave is the conservation agent in my office, and they are probably close to the end of the information gathering situation. They've been looking at all of our stormwater systems and how they feed into all of the rivers and brooks and streams. And I anticipate a spring delivery of that model, and we'll have a really good understanding of how a tweak in this area affects something downstream. And then we'll be able to then apply for additional opportunities. And I think Chike in his office, and I don't want to speak for, you know, as the new stormwater ordinance has gone into effect, certainly gives him more tools to use as the city moves forward.
Well, I think that's great to hear that that you have a plan and that they're working together. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Texera. Is that? I thought you had your hand up there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a question for Superintendent Pat Hill. As you drive around the city, I drive around the city, on a manhole, I know every time I go to a certain street, I see that it's not cleaning up. And when it rains, you do get flood. What can we do to make sure those manhole, it's clean, especially when we go into winter time, make sure it's all clean?
So, I didn't hear the address, Counselor.
No, I'm saying around the city. In general.
I mean, it's very difficult this time of year to keep the streets clean. I mean, with the leaves falling in the fall, we try to keep our sweepers out as much as we can to keep the surface of the catch basins clean. In the same process, we're trying to pick up trash and clean up debris in the street. It's, when catch basins don't take water, most of the time, we get calls from the public. So if there's a catch basin that's full or it seems like it's puddling around there, that's generally when we go out and check them. We have like 5,000 to 6,000 catch basins in the city. So we try to keep up with them the best we can. They're all cleaned once a year. Half of them are done in the fall and half of them are done in the spring, cleaned, the catch basins themselves. As for the piping, we're in the process of trying to put a project together to go out and clean all the pipes that run from the catch basins into the main drainage system.
All right, thank you for your answer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. And there's also See-Click Fix for the folks at home. They can report any catch basin near their house just on their phone. Counselors, we're going to go into a second round of speaking. Is there anyone who has not yet spoken who would like to speak first? Counselor Minicello.
Good evening. Mr. Engineer, thank you for coming. Would you say that this area, the Trout Brook area, is a priority in the city of Brockton amongst other areas that are also areas of concern?
As I said, until the whole city is modeled, you cannot actually pick that this area is priority.
I'm sorry, I could not hear.
Until the whole city is modeled, which we are doing now.
Yes.
You cannot say that this place is priority. It's then that when you...
It's not a priority.
He's saying you cannot say it is a priority. So yes, it would be a priority.
Okay. All right, so you don't consider this an area a priority?
Based on what we have now, no. I wouldn't consider any area priority.
Okay.
But until we do model the whole city and mitigate what we need to mitigate, some areas that are flooding now will not continue flooding.
So would you consider then this a premature? I mean, investing the money in this project?
They are still doing still study. If we do the complete the entire study, maybe they are going to be doing only 30% of the project. Before we go to 50%, it might require reducing the work they are doing, they are proposing. Okay. That is, if we model the whole city and the flooding level goes down, then it means that we don't need to do everything, and we're not wasting any money. We only did a study. So the design, we'll design it based on what the final study, model showed us.
Okay, so the city is being asked to provide a certain amount of money to match the grant, but it's not a one-to-one match. I believe the city needs to contribute $54,000.
That match I believe it's coming from the federal government.
I get, would you say that that match is worthwhile, or is that money that we should spend somewhere else with regard to properties that currently flood in Brockton? I mean, that's what I'm trying to determine, whether this is a good investment, and whether, as a counselor, I should be voting to invest this money. And if you say to me, well, this is not really a priority, or this is not the area of concern that we should be focusing on, then that's going to make me lean one way. But if you say to me, I'm just trying to figure out, is this a good investment for Brockton right now, or is this something that we should focus on some other area and use this money in some other area that you say is more of a priority? That's all.
Counselor, I'm sorry, I don't mean to jump in. Excuse me for jumping in. The city has received a federal grant that we are using for a match to this state grant, so we are not putting out any Brockton money into this project. And that was outlined in Troy's email that went out Saturday night.
Okay, so the match of $54,000, the local match is not coming out of the city of Brockton?
That is correct.
It's not going from the
Okay.
It'll be matched by another grant we just received.
Oh, okay.
And should we want to, this grant is very specific to this location. We would not be able to use it anywhere else in the city if we chose to.
So in your opinion, Mr. Engineer, is this a worthwhile project then to pursue? For the, I guess, the
Is it
effort,
worthwhile
for
to
the effort
pursue?
of manpower and investment of time, should we be pursuing this, I guess?
It's worthwhile to pursue because we're only doing it to 30%.
So you're saying it is worthwhile?
Yes, it's worthwhile.
And so the investment of the city of Brockton really is not an investment of the city of Brockton financially, because you're saying it's coming from another grant that we've received? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it.
Is that Counselor?
Yes, I'm upset. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor D'Agostino, and then I believe we're going to the second round.
Thank you all for being here. I know it's getting a little late, so I'll try and be brief. First, you just answered one of my other questions, Mr. May, that the grants we've gotten is specific to this project, so that was one of the things I was looking for. I guess what I'm still struggling with a little bit, I'm glad that there's no city money going into this, because that definitely matters. But I'm still trying to understand, the engineer just said, if I heard you right, in order to know what the priority, the worst spot, the spot we need to get on ASAP is, we need this full report to really know that, which we don't have yet. So what was the basis on applying for a grant to do this specific area when we don't have the full report to tell us where our greatest need is? Why did we go after this without knowing where our greatest need is?
I think we have the memo 8 for Trout Brook is sufficient to warrant us to apply for these funds. When the model is done, we'll have 100, 200 projects that will be identified. And we can all go through those and rank those. But while we're waiting for that to happen, we have the data for the Trout Brook area. It makes sense to begin that process, both from the SNEEP and the MVP process, to survey the area and to better understand the soil conditions and how the culvert was installed and what grade and condition it's in right now, so that we can move forward rather quickly for this project. Now, I would say it's important specifically for the people who live in that district, in Ward 5, because they're right up against the river. They are at flood risk. So is it as great a challenge as Westgate or Kmart? It's hard to say, but it is to them. And then secondly, or lastly, this project is part of an overall piece of work that we have been studying, and, and so it is a way of advancing our downtown redevelopment and the redevelopment of the Trout Brook area.
Okay, thank you for that. So we have the data on this area, so do we not have flood hazard data on other parts of the city that, I mean, you said we went after this because we have the data, so we don't have data on any other parts of the city?
If it's sufficient, but I'll let Chike.
The data we are talking about, data we're going to collect is engineering data that you use for design. That, no matter what you do, that will not go to waste. But when we do the overall study, we know the extent to which we will use the information.
So we don't have enough data on the other areas of the city
Yes.
today as we sit, which is what we're waiting for this full report to give us. Okay,
The full report will give us the amount of work we need to do in each area.
so
What we are doing now in this area, we are collecting engineering information so that when we get that implementation in that, we'll start, and then we'll start design on the other areas.
Okay. So I'm also wondering, so I understand we went after this because we had the data. We don't have data in other places. Why? Like, what made this area the place that we ended up having enough data for? Why is this, you know what I mean?
He's focused on urban development in that area. The part we studied before, they have done pre-engineering in that area and did the flood modeling to what is possible there. This place is a little bit upstream of that, so it's a connection to what they have done, what has been done before. If we do the study now, the level of flooding in that area may not be as much as if there's a big ponding area next to Westgate Mall that is not utilized, which I believe, if it's not utilized fully, will reduce flooding downstream.
And forgive me, I'm just, and I'm sure you answered my question and it just didn't click for me.
Can I?
Yes.
So the city, with Larry Raleigh as DPW commissioner, applied for a grant, a MVP grant, an action grant 2 years ago, 3 years ago, to study the Salisbury Brook and the Salisbury Plain River. This Memo 8 is an offshoot of that, the Trout Brook, because it feeds into the Salisbury Plain River. So because we had some of that data already in-house, we had enough that we could apply for this next grant to continue the work.
All right. Okay, no, so we did a study over here and this was close by and tied to it. Is that kind of, and then, Chike, did I hear you correctly when I think my colleague, Councilor Castro, was asking you some questions, and I want to make sure I understood you properly. This project down Brook will positively impact folks further out of that area? Am I understanding that correctly? Or no?
New study we are doing will impact everybody in the sense that it will reduce the flooding every area.
Okay.
That is what I
So,
believe.
one of the pieces of the scope is to, if we were to create some places upstream where we can detain water and release it slowly,
Gradually after the storm.
it helps Ward 4. This study is going to tell us how much we need to excavate and how much it'll help Ward, downstream.
Okay. Okay. All right. Again, and just like my colleague, Councilor Minicello had said, I just want to make sure
that I have an understanding. So if somebody says to me, hey, why did you vote to do that first? I want to be able to answer them, you know? And so that was kind of why I'm asking these questions of why this first, and does it, you know, impact anybody down the line? So, all right, I appreciate that. I think you've given me, you know, the information I needed. Thank you.
It's the low-hanging fruit. We need to get it all, but this is the first piece that we grab.
Right. Okay. Appreciate it. Thank you both.
Thank you.
All set, Counselor?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you. All right, Counselor Rodriguez.
Hope you brought breakfast.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. May, how are you?
Good evening, sir.
GK, how you doing?
Fine, thank you.
I've got just a quick couple questions here. Where do we stand on the other 70% of the funding that will actually conclude the design work on this particular project?
Once we have completed the 30% and the additional modeling that is part of this scope of work, we will then apply for another series of grants. We had a meeting in Troy's office, well, not Troy's office, we met in GAR room. We have a team of folks that includes myself, Pat Hill, Troy, Sidney Merrill, and Paul Umano, who is a financial analyst and former grant writer. And we are charting all of the grants that the city is applying for and how they interconnect with each other, that especially with the new funding that comes out of the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So there are millions of dollars that are flowing out of Washington, and each one has a bit and component that all fits into this thing, so that at the end of the project, or end of the day, we have a complete project.
But if I'm reading this right, this grant funding, and by the way, I'm not against the grant. A grant is a grant is a grant, no matter how you look at it. But this grant only covers 30% of the design.
Yes.
So the vast majority of the design is not even, we're not even talking about the vast majority of the design. That's to come.
Yes, it is.
So what are you going to design 30% in hopes that funds will come down for the other 70%? Or are you going to hold off until you, at least you have some fundings and go at least 50 to 60, 70% of the project?
Well, the federal government likes to see you have money in the game. If you look at the Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP, that is run out of OCPC, which are the state construction, road construction funds, we have to do the engineering in order to get onto that program. So the federal government wants to make sure that we have advanced the program to the next level. And so they are seeing dozens of projects coming up from communities where we pick away at the project to get to the end. It's the old adage of how do you eat an elephant, which is a bite at a time. And I've never eaten an elephant, but that's how
I was
it's called.
wondering about that one myself, but.
But each project that we do moves us forward to the goal line. Sometimes we can throw that Hail Mary pass and score a touchdown right then and there. Other times we have to advance 10 yards at a time down the field, but we're heading in the same direction.
But my concern is that we're going to go through all this design phase of this project, and 5, 10 years down the road, the project, there's nothing done because all we're doing is doing the design work. That's the fear that some of us have because, I mean, honestly, you know, for some of us that have been living in this city for quite some time, we see a lot of renditions, designs, work being done, but in terms of physically moving forward and getting the projects done, it's years down the road before we see anything. And we're here kind of, you know, spending an evening in November talking about the design when in fact it's not even a complete design because I can't see the federal government giving you the money to move along with something that you only have 30% of its design done. You know, so that's the fear factor that's coming from my part. You know, yes, it's great that we're getting some funding to do something, no matter what it is. You know, some of us are counselors for the entire city, so whatever gets done in the city, you know, good for us. But at the same time, I want to be realistic that it's only 30% of a design project that you have, that there's another 70% that's sitting out there somewhere, and then there's no serious money to do anything in terms of the project itself.
I jumped up, Counselor, because I believe I can address that. The primary reason why we asked you, and you agreed to institute that stormwater fee, was to give the city a continuous stream of revenue to address not only studies, but design and construction of mitigation for stormwater impacts throughout the city. And so we anticipate that that revenue will support on an ongoing basis the actual solutions that are based on the studies that we're undergoing now. So I don't anticipate we'll be relying solely on grants from the federal government, although that will continue to be a source of revenue. But we do anticipate spending money from that source for years to come, which is why when we asked you to create the stormwater enterprise, we dedicated just a small portion of that annual revenue to the administrative costs, so that the majority of the money that we collect will actually go to solutions.
I don't know, but I was here during budget, and when we were talking about these items from the stormwater, it seems that we were spending it all, most of it, in personnel. You know, hiring engineers, hiring this, hiring that, so I don't see exactly what's left over from that pie in terms of being put into this. But my concern with that, though, Mr. CFO, is the fact that, again, this is why it's important for us to have a true picture of what we have going on in the city as far as priorities are concerned. Because, again, if you ask, I mean, the engineer and some of the other folks sitting around the table as to what are the priorities for flood mitigation in this city, this particular project might not be on the top 5 or 10. And yet we're now taking monies that were designed for the overall concept of flood mitigation, in the sense, and putting it in a project that might not be a priority for the city. And that's the concern that some of us have. You know, and that actually comes down to, you know, a recommendation to perhaps Mr. May and the office up there in terms of, you know, let's kind of hit the pause button in terms of applying for a project until we figure out exactly where that priority list is, because something that you might see as a priority might not be coming down the pipeline as a priority for the city itself. So we should be able to continue to go after grants, continue to go after programs in general, but not something specific, because every time we do that, it seems like we're putting ourselves in a position forcing us to go along with a specific project, whether we like it or not, and it might not be a priority for the entire city.
The problem is that the grants are structured that you have to do, there are different grants. There are grants you have to do but 30% before you can apply.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying if there's a flood mitigation grant, it's a flood mitigation grant. It doesn't say you got to put it in this place or that place or this place. You as a city can determine what is the best or the most appropriate place to put that grant in. You know, I can understand with the 30, the 40, or whatever percentage that they're telling you, but as far as the overall scheme of things, it's saying you apply for a grant based on your needs, not necessarily. I mean, if they want to give you a grant to look into the possibility of developing a new space shuttle, are we going to do that if we don't have the components that go along with that stuff? I mean, there's certain things that we cannot jump on just because it's available, but it has to be what's in the best interest of the city itself based on the priorities of the city. Because I want to make sure that if the studies come back and say priority 1 is this, okay, it's Main Street Pond, 2, Montella Street Pond, then at least we know that it's Main Street Pond and Montella Street Pond, whatever that project might be, but at least we have an idea versus just, well, you know what, I like this particular pond, or this particular river, or this particular waterway, or this particular trout. I just want to make sure we're not all over the place when we're talking about this particular project. And finally, Mr. Mayor, I just had a quick question. Who owns the vast majority of the land around the Trout Brook? Do you know?
The vast majority in the urban renewal district is owned by CSX Rail Corporation. The land on which we are studying from the MVP is all publicly owned.
But the vast majority of the land around the brook that will actually benefit from this project is owned by CSX?
The people who will, the beneficiaries of this design work, when we build it out, will be the residents that are on the east side of the brook. So it includes the Haitian Church, includes Evans Machines, and about 25 triple and double deckers in that neighborhood up to MacArthur. It's not MacArthur.
Manchester.
Manchester, thank you.
So not CSX?
No, the proposed levee is on the south side of the river and protects Brockton residents.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Farwell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I got involved in this because I thought that this indicated how dysfunctional we were here. We had a complete grant application approved, we formed a committee, and not one member of the city council was on that committee, someone who would understand what was being done, priorities in the city, flood mitigation. And you know what, folks, as long as we sit here and keep approving these grants, you'll be consulted when your vote is needed, and you'll be marginalized, and you'll be forgotten. But yet, we're going to take the criticism on flooding in the city and neighborhoods that are impacted. Mr. May, the last time you were here, you made it very clear when I questioned why there were no councilors involved. I didn't have anything to do with that. I didn't put it together. That was Larry Rowley. I was just a participant. So how did the Director of Planning and Economic Development get involved in grants involving stormwater, flood mitigation, culverts, sidewalks, roads? Isn't that a DPW function? I mean, if the city engineer works for the DPW, I don't understand why that wasn't a DPW function. Now, perhaps you have a degree in engineering that I'm not aware of. Perhaps you're a hydrological engineer renowned, but I don't understand how you got involved in this latest issue, which clearly, to me, organizationally, should fall squarely in the DPW and in particular with the city engineer's office. Were you assigned to do this by the mayor? Did you just decide on your own that you were going to do it? Or give me the genesis of how the Director of Planning and Economic Development got involved in an environmental grant.
So let me take a step back. And when I said that I was a participant in the original study and that I wasn't involved with setting up that committee, that was Larry Rowley. That is correct. That doesn't mean I wasn't an active participant in this process and have been involved in the MVP project since its inception. Now, you asked the question of why wasn't a counselor on this committee?
Yeah.
My answer was, that was not my job.
That's correct. That's what
That
you
was
said.
Mr. Rowley. So to make it sound like I had absolutely nothing to do with the MVP planning process is incorrect.
Did you apply for the original grant?
I did not apply for the original
All
grant.
right, so why did you get involved in this grant? My question
I'm
to you
involved in
is,
this grant as I'm involved in several other infrastructure grants. I write all the Mass Works contracts and our grants and applications and monitor all of that work and make sure that that gets done. So there are infrastructure projects that advance our economic development goals throughout the city. And we participate, and my department and I lead those efforts to improve infrastructure where they are supporting an economic development project. So right now, you may remember in Ward 4, we just installed new crosswalks and rapid flashing rectangular beacons to improve safety in, around the train station and around Keith Park. That is a grant that I applied for and my department managed.
But why shouldn't the DPW do that? Why shouldn't the DPW?
Let's try it, Council. We'll try and
All right,
keep the flow going.
I'm trying to narrow the time that I'm taking up here, Mr. Chairman. I'm just trying to find out why the DPW would not be involved in the types of grants that I just mentioned to you. Infrastructure,
We
flood
are a
mitigation.
team. They are involved because Chike reviews all the plans that are prepared for construction, and Pat and I meet regularly through the infrastructure and the capital budget planning process. So we coordinate projects as we advance them.
Okay, I guess I'm going to ask this of the DPW Commissioner. Commissioner, if we have infrastructure improvements in this city below ground, and they involve culverts, drainage, roads, sidewalks, is that not a DPW function? Is that not something that you would coordinate through the engineer's office? Because if I used Mr. May's analogy, he should be involved in police grants, because to the extent we have a robust public safety program, that enhances economic development. Surely there has to be some delineation here in this city where people they stay in their own lane and they do their work, and certainly collaborate and cooperate. But I just don't get it. And I've been in the mayor's office. And I can assure you that the planning and economic development person didn't get involved in DPW work. If he can,
But I want you to know, though, that my office is the one that's coordinating the public safety building and
I didn't say
and its
that.
construction.
I said,
You
I
just
said-
asked, should I be involved in police grants? And I want to point out that we all have specialties that we can be siloed into. We also have skills that we can bring to several projects throughout the city. And whichever means of advancing those, the fastest and the best should be used.
Well,
So,
some of my colleagues have skills too, Mr. May, and maybe they should be involved in some of these things.
and
Commissioner,
you
go
are-
ahead.
and I'm managing the public safety project. You're on that committee. So is another counselor. So I think
All right.
that it's there.
So I don't want to speak, counsel, for what happened prior to this.
Okay.
Mr. Commissioner, just get you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just for
Yeah, if you don't
just for the folks at home.
So I'm not going to speak, Counselor, to what happened prior to me arriving where I am as the commissioner. I did play a role with Mr. Rowley. Oftentimes, the question did come up, and I think that was something that we've really had a lot of discussion about lately with the CFO, with the mayor, about pretty much the point that you just brought up. You know, sometimes why are these infrastructure projects being applied for through another department? We have been working, you know, tirelessly lately to try to collaborate as a city and try to get a handle on that. I think you'll see in the future that the DPW will be managing a lot more of these projects. You know, Rob talks, and Rob does a wonderful job. Rob has applied for a lot of MassWorks grants that we are managing now, that he was managing in the beginning. So I think, to get to your point, I think you're going to see an improvement and a change in that in the near future. I think we're doing the best we can to change the atmosphere from what it was before.
I hope so, because frankly, for you, I was embarrassed to see the Director of Planning and Economic Development up there a few minutes ago saying, well, if we do this, we're going to solve this downstream. If we do this, we're going to be able to, this is going to have an effect. I mean, that's, again, unless he has an engineering degree, that should be your department, that should be the city engineer. And Mr. Chairman, I just have a couple of questions if there's a representative from Fuss and O'Neill here, and then I'm done.
Okay.
And you know what?
Is
I'm
there
going to,
representative?
colleagues, I'm going to vote for this grant, because you know what? 2 years from now, it's going to amount to nothing. I've seen it time and time and time again. So mark my words, I'm going to vote for it. I've had an epiphany. You pick and choose your battles, and then you sit back and watch the results. So do we have someone from Fuss and O'Neill here?
We do.
All right, could I ask a couple of questions of that person, please?
If you may part the way, gentlemen. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. By the way, none of my consternation is directed at you. I want you to know I read your 169-page report, and I found that it was informative. I found it was thorough. In particular, you had one section about reducing runoff at Westgate Mall. You'll probably remember that. So my first question is, where in your 169-page report does it indicate that the first opportunity the city should have to obtain funds and do a design to mitigate against flooding should be in the Trout Brook area?
So the first thing that you need to understand to answer that question is that the original scope of that grant from 2019 was to look at the Salisbury Plain River and Salisbury Brook corridor. It did not include Trout Brook.
That's correct.
In the course of that study, we realized that the inputs of the volume of water coming from Trout Brook into that system were significant, and that was something that needed to be further explored. Late in the grant, there became an opportunity to add that piece on, and we did so. That is why the memo that Rob May has referred to as the Task 8 memo is separate. So much of the scope of that study in the 169-page report, and this speaks to Councilor Nicastro's questions as well with the risk areas, never looked at Trout Brook because it was not part of the original scope. But when you look at Trout Brook individually, it is significant, and it has a significant influence on the lower part of the city because of the volume of water that it does send downstream. And so we do believe that looking at Trout Brook will have potential benefits not only for the immediate vicinity of the Trout Brook area and its residents, but also potentially for downstream areas like Kmart.
You would agree with me, however, that Trout Brook is part of the Salisbury River, Salisbury Plain River system, because we just spoke about the fact that it has an impact.
It's part of the larger corridor, but it was not part of the original scope, the geographic scope that was planned for that original grant study.
And do you know who set the geographical scope originally, if you remember?
It was a collaboration between my firm and the city, and it was bounded in part by the available funds and the need to limit the scope.
Okay, now, given all that you know now, and you've done a lot of work, and I did read the supplemental report, which was shorter, in your professional judgment, where is the most critical area that the city of Brockton should focus its attention and funding to mitigate against flooding in neighborhoods and established business areas?
I don't think that's a fair question, frankly. There's many areas in the city that are in dire need of having flooding solutions, but you have to start somewhere, and
So
this
there's
is an
no
opportunity
ranking,
to start.
We don't have any ranked by priority, or?
No, that would be like ranking your district versus yours. I mean, they're both priorities.
Well, except that you did have formulas in here as to how you would arrive at certain priorities for what you thought the city should do. And believe me, math was not my strong point, but it would seem to me that you did rank a number of areas because you labeled them hotspots. And you even included pictures of hotspots that you thought should really have a great deal of attention. If you remember that?
I do. So there's also a distinction to be made between risk hotspots, which are areas that can potentially be impacted by flooding, and the best locations for solutions that could benefit those areas. And one of the interesting things and complicating things about flooding is that those two don't always align. Sometimes the best place to solve a flooding problem is not immediately where the flooding occurs, but somewhere upstream or downstream.
Obviously, yeah. No, I understand. I guess I'm troubled by the fact that there wasn't a ranking. I mean, you did rank some, you did have a Section 6 prioritization of flood risks. and you had a scoring mechanism, and that's where I obtained the different hotspots that you outlined. And frankly, I did not find Trout Brook, which intrigued me. I know you mentioned, or the report mentioned a lot about the Old Colony YMCA and the Westgate Mall area, Ellis Brett Pond, and I'm just trying to make sure, as a counselor at large, that I try to help as many people around the city as I can, and not just narrowly focus on one area that one person decided should be, this is where we're going to go.
Of course.
Because I'm trying to get a global response as opposed to a narrow response. So, all right, you've answered my question. You don't have a professional opinion as to where our number one spot should be, and I thank you for the reports. They were most informative.
And if I may, I'll just reiterate that you would not find a hotspot for Trout Brook in that report because it was not part of the geographic scope when that study was conducted.
I understand. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselors, I have nobody else on my roster here.
Motion to recommend favorably back to the full city council.
Second.
Motion's been properly made and seconded to recommend this favorably back to the full city council. All in favor? All opposed? The motion passes. Thank you. Councilor Farwell, did you have a motion regarding the agenda?
Yes, I would like to take, in deference to Mr. O'Donnell, I would like to take item number, forgive me, 5 out of order and have it heard next.
Councilor, is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been properly made and seconded. Take item number 5 out of order. All in favor? All opposed? The motion passes. Good evening, Mr. O'Donnell. I mean evening.
Whereas the Massachusetts legislature enacted Chapter 59, Section 5C, allowing the residential property tax exemptions for certain properties, and whereas the Department of Revenue published information about this exemption and the types of communities which adopt the exemption, noting large cities or towns with many non-owner occupied properties like apartment buildings adopt this program, and whereas the city of Brockton does not currently offer this exemption, and whereas it is appropriate to discuss and evaluate whether this annual exemption would be of benefit to owner-occupied residential property in the city. Now, therefore, be it resolved, the Chair of the Board of Assessors appear before a committee of the Brockton City Council to discuss the residential tax exemption program, how it would affect the amounts collected from owner-occupied properties, and to prepare a written summary of how the city could implement of MGL Chapter 59, Section 5C with various exemption amounts which could be included in any such program. Invited John O'Donnell, Chair of the Board of Assessors.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman.
Good evening, Chairman. I'd like,
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to start off. I
Okay,
filed
so-
this. I'd like to thank Mr. O'Donnell for a very thorough examination of this issue, as well as the attachments that he has provided. I'd like to thank him for the conversation that we had over the weekend on Sunday. The reason I filed this is that we have, and this is not hyperbole, we have a perfect financial storm brewing. We have tremendous increases in property values here in Brockton. We have increases in pricing for food, for heating oil, for gasoline, for the usual commodities that people buy, and we have people who are really, really hurting. And I looked at the new valuations that appear on the assessor's website, and looking at how much some of the houses went up in valuation, that means that we are going to see increases in the amounts owed by property owners, and they're only going to have 2 payments within which they can make up those arrearages, because there are only 2 payments left between now and the end of fiscal year 2023. So I was curious as to what options we may have. I did publish on social media some initial figures, which, thanks to Mr. O'Donnell, I found are still significant increases, but they will be slightly less because we do have a current 1.75 factor for taxation in the city, which gives a break to homeowners. But we are still going to go we're going to go up in terms of the amount of taxes that people owe. And I'm not talking about $50 or $100. I think some people are going to be $300, $400, $500 in increases, and it's going to come at the worst possible time when people are really trying to put together their family budget. So having said all that, and I'll have a few questions for Mr. O'Donnell after he perhaps responds to this resolve. And again, I thank you, John, for all of your work.
Problem. So basically, the residential exemptions are only utilized in 15 communities out of 351 in the state. It's used mainly in communities that have a high number of apartment buildings and seasonal rentals. There's 6 communities on the Cape and then 9 in Greater Boston. But what it basically does, it's going to raise the residential rate. It'll raise, if this option was utilized last year, it would have raised the rate from $13.97 to 19.33 if you took a 35-cent exemption. So that's a $5.36. So basically, it's all in the residential. So at the tax hearing, we shift the burden to the commercial, industrial, and personal property. If this was adopted, you'd be shifting it in the residential rate. So moderately priced homes would benefit, and anyone over basically $440,000 will get another increase above the increase they're getting from the regular values going up and stuff. That's the gist of it. So, and there's some good parts about it, so it'll help lower price homes, but that doesn't mean it's going to help elderly, because a lot of elderly have houses that are over $400,000. So it'd help people in condominiums and then the lower tier of houses. And like if someone owned a 3-family, non-owner occupied, their value would go up roughly $1,400. And most likely those people would pass on that $1,400 increase to their tenants.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, that's the bottom line. It doesn't work in many communities. Like Quinns, I spoke to a number of assessors in other communities that don't have it, that are similar to Brockton, and it just doesn't work in the communities. It works in Boston, Everett, Somerville, Cambridge, Watertown, Waltham, but they have a large commercial base that supplements it. We only have 15% of our taxes come from our commercial. 85% comes from residential properties.
Mr. O'Donnell, you said something to me over the weekend, well, couple of things that really stuck with me, and that is the lack of commercial property that we have in this city. And I hope all of my colleagues are listening, that we really need to put an emphasis on making the city attractive for commercial development and not always housing, because I'm not against housing, but in and of itself, it doesn't get us to where we want to be in terms of new growth and revenue. And the other thing you said, which I thought was fascinating, is taking a piece of commercial property and either rezoning it, having the ZBA decide it should be used for residential purposes, is just, it's just crazy. Because it takes away a valuable piece of land that could possibly be developed into a commercial use. I mean, the one that comes to mind is 132 Court Street, where we're going to put 150 apartments, 1 parking space per apartment, not even enough for people to have visitors. And that was either commercial or industrial property that could have been rezoned.
That's industrial there.
And it would have, perhaps, being near the Trout Brook area, maybe that would have been a linchpin to something going on there. So you would agree that, at least for our purposes, we should try to focus on increasing commercial development and making sure that we don't convert a lot of land from commercial to R1 or R2?
Yeah, definitely. Even since fiscal year 17, we've lost 5% of our commercial base. We were at 19, almost 20% at that time. We're down to 14.48 this year. It's a lot over a short period of time.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, other councilors may have questions, so I'm all set for now, and I thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Minicello, followed by Counselor Thompson.
Good evening, Mr. O'Donnell. So the threshold would be 440,272.26, correct?
Yeah, that's if we, if you guys had a 30% exemption, yeah?
And that value to me doesn't seem like a fat cat. I mean, to me, you know, 400, a house that's worth $440,000.
You got to remember, there's 24,000 residential properties in the city. So it takes all 24,000 to come up with the average. It's going to take vacant lots, everything.
Right, so this will affect a large number of people in Brockton, correct?
Yeah, all these people that bought $650,000 homes in the last 2 years would get a huge increase in their taxes.
And a lot of those people that invested that money, I mean, it could be teachers and firemen and.
Yeah.
It would seem to me that you're basically going to be pitting one group against the other,
Yeah,
one residential group against the other in the city.
Like I said, Council Fowler, it doesn't work in many communities in the state.
Yeah.
It works in 15 communities, that's it. And those 15 communities consistently adopt it. I think it was either Swansea or Somerset, they had it for a couple of years and it didn't work down there. So, I think the most it ever had was 17 communities in a fiscal year.
All right, yeah, I definitely have some reservations about this, because I think that people who have invested in the city, you know, to live here in the city, are basically going to be handcuffed with this increase, you know, and decided to, no, I want to live in Brockton, and this is going to be the thanks they get, you know?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, Mr. O'Donnell. So I know this is kind of another one of those, one of those bills or nomenclatures that can be misleading. They say it's an exemption, but nobody's not paying. Well, money is not being collected. The money's being collected. Exactly. It's just who is paying for it. Exactly. And the way that this is set up is basically that 440 line, people below that line is benefiting, and people above that line is paying more. Seems like a raw deal for anybody whose home is valued over $440,000. And reviewing the new assessment data that you sent out maybe a month ago, I was looking at Ward 5 homes in that data, and I mean, I would say the vast majority are over $440,000.
Last year, so it might be a little higher, but it wouldn't be that much, it wouldn't increase dramatically.
Right. So essentially, this is a bad deal for Ward 5 residents. Maybe a few of them would benefit, but the vast majority would not. Secondly, I understand the need to help out seniors or those who, have lower incomes, but just seniors specifically, you stated that if a senior has a home in a trust, that they would not be able to avail themselves of this exemption. And from my understanding, a lot of seniors to protect against Medicare taking, value from their home if they need, nursing services in the future, they protect their houses by putting them into trusts. And so maybe if we're trying to help seniors, this is not the most efficient way of doing that.
That's one of the red flags that the DOR tells every community. If you're trying to help the seniors, this may not be the means to do it. Because a lot of seniors have valuable homes. They don't have mortgages on them, but still their house values are high. I mean, a lot of seniors on the west side, their values would be way over 440.
Right. I mean, would be devastating to Ward 1 or almost every ward in the city. And again, I don't like the idea of pitting residents versus residents. And that's essentially what this would be doing. It would be Brocktonians versus Brocktonians, and I think that would not create, a cohesive city that we want to create in Brockton. It would be the haves versus the have-nots, and I just don't think that's, conducive to a cohesive city. So I would not support the city adopting a residential tax exemption. But I do appreciate Councilor Farwell for putting this forward. I do appreciate the conversation. It's something that, as a city, we should discuss. We should inform ourselves on the matter. I think reading through everything, I have informed myself, and just my opinion, it's just not a good deal for Ward 5 or for the city of Brockton. I appreciate your time, though. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Nicastro, followed by Azak, followed by D'Agostino.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. O'Donnell. Thank you very much. And I wanted to focus on the area that Councilor Thompson just mentioned with people putting their houses into trusts, because Ward 4 has a significant number of people who are trying to age in place in their lovely homes. Their children are grown, their mortgages are paid off or close to paid off. And so they go to their local estate planner, and he puts their house into he or she, puts their house into a trust, helping them do their overall estate plan, and suddenly they don't qualify for a residential exemption, even though they've lived there in many instances for many years, and there's nothing that can be done.
According to DOR, no, because they're not the owner. They'd be a beneficiary.
Okay. I have spoken with our state rep, Jerry Cassidy, about increasing the exemptions that I've heard you speak about at the Council on Aging, that seniors can avail themselves of. The thresholds and the ceilings are too low, given the values of our real estate.
Yeah, we did that under Mayor Carpenter probably 5-6 years ago. So we can look at it again. I think we have to bring it to you guys to bring the thresholds up. The state has we're not at the maximum.
Okay, we're not.
Income or assets.
And I understood that in some instances it was up to the state to increase those, but in others are by ordinance?
It's by ordinance. They might have the limit, the top, but we're not at the top.
I'll come in to see you then, because I think that will really help. The sooner the better. Beyond that, is there anything else we can do to address this perfect storm that we see coming toward our residents?
I don't think so. I mean, we're limited what we can do.
Yes. Yes.
We can look at the thresholds. I think they can be changed. But it's done by ordinance.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Azak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Mr. O'Donnell. How are you?
Evening, good.
So Councilor Nicastro just asked one of the questions that I want to ask. What can we do to, is there anything we can do? And you answered that, obviously. So, so my question tonight is, depending on, this is just a resolve. I think it doesn't, this is a resolve, correct? So it doesn't matter if, even if.
Well, the option has to come from the mayor.
Right, so with tonight, even if it's voted favorable, it doesn't mean that this passes, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
Correct, so that, I just want to be clear on that.
Just a resolve.
It's just a resolve, it's just informational, so very good. That's all I needed to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor D'Agostino.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here tonight and hanging with us well into the evening. So yeah, I just, first I was going to make the comment about looking at ways to provide seniors with some actual relief. If that's what we're looking to do here, let's find the mechanism to do that. So I would echo that sentiment from my colleagues who've already said that. And it seems like this certainly doesn't do it. I was wondering too, I mean, at this 440,000, given the current market, current values, I mean, it would seem like an awful lot of homes in this city are at or above that point.
Well, yeah, well, because it takes everything in the residential class. It takes
Right.
vacant land, there's 24,000 parcels, so it's going to take everything into the average.
It just seems like this would end up
I mean,
being
there's $10 million apartment complexes that are in that average.
right. So because it's an average, it takes the lows and the very highs, and you know, it just seems like it would put definitely a increased tax burden on our city's middle class and not really provide much relief to anybody.
A third of the taxpayers' values would, taxes would go up. A third.
Right. Right. So, yeah, again, all right, so I just wanted to thank you for the clarification, and again, I echo the calls that maybe we look at some kind of, or maybe review what we have in place to provide some relief for seniors, but I don't think this is the time to be increasing anybody's taxes where everything else is going up, you know, or at least shifting, you know, the tax like this. This just, I just don't think this accomplishes anything that is really meaningful for a majority of our residents, you know. It kind of seems like you tend to agree.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Any counselors who have not spoken who would like to speak? Seeing none, Counselor Farwell, followed by Counselor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. This was a resolve just to research information. I knew absolutely nothing about residential exemptions, and when the tax bills hit in January, and we are going to hear from constituents, I wanted to make sure that we as a body had done our due diligence and we had looked at this particular state law to see if it, in fact, it would benefit the city. And if it doesn't, and if it's going to hurt people, obviously we don't want to do it. I will emphasize, and I'm going to ask Mr. O'Donnell again, some people are going to get tax bills that are $500, $600, $700 more. Is that a fair guesstimate?
100% the truth.
100% the truth. Oh, great. It's going to hurt folks, and as I say, I just wanted us to study this. I mean, the more knowledge we have, the better prepared we are to hopefully answer questions from constituents. So, again, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Thompson, followed by Counselor Nicastro.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll try to make this quick. And, I concur with a lot of my colleagues when they talk about, you know, our seniors, and if this was in an effort to help our seniors, and I think the conversation and the discussion was very, you know, it was a good conversation and enlightening. But just, Mr. O'Donnell, when I heard you talking about our senior exemptions, I've been researching this issue and trying to put together an ordinance that would help address some of the senior exemptions. And in my research, I found that some of our exemptions are kind of state guided, where if the state goes up, we don't have to do anything on our end. They automatically go up to meet the state thresholds. And that's because they're state reimbursable.
That's the veterans.
Oh, is it the veterans?
Only the veterans, yes.
Okay. So I'm doing both, so if I'm confusing the two, I apologize. But I, from my understanding was that some immediately, you know, go up as per statute because they're state reimbursable, and then there are others like the work program in which we essentially.
Yeah, we know the MD1, the returns.
Yeah.
We only get a portion. Like on our veterans, we get reimbursed almost 100%. And on our two elderlies, we.
But I thought there were certain ones that we did not get reimbursed for, and those ones that we didn't get reimbursed for, we as the city have to address those via ordinance.
Those are tax write-off.
The tax write-offs, right.
Yes.
So I'm happy to work with any other counselor who wants to try to put forth some of these exemptions, because I've been working on it with Kelly Young in our veterans department to try to bring these forth. But it was my research that some automatically meet the state statute, others we as a city have to address via ordinance.
Which is our large exemption for the elderly. We don't get reimbursed on that. So it used to be 500, we raised it to 750 a few years ago, so we can look at that, but we don't get any money back.
And that's currently at what, 1,000 today via statute?
750.
Meaning, but the state allows us to increase it to a certain.
No, it might even be 1,500.
Okay, yeah, I believe I was looking at that one as well. So, right, we as a city would have to address an ordinance to increase that number.
We paid out $63,000 last year.
All right. And the work programs as well, right? Those,
Programs don't, we only had, I think, 2 veterans and 6 seniors this year, that's it. They don't get many people. They
but-
could have a max of 30, but they don't get 30 each.
30 right, the 30 seniors or veterans can
30
be enrolled.
So they could have 60 total, but they don't get many.
And is that,
Raised it to $1,500 now. They can get work up to $1,500.
right, which works out to, because they do it by minimum wage, right? So that's approximately 101 hours or something like that, that they can work for the city. Do we have to address that by ordinance to increase it to that?
Already been
It's
increased.
already, okay.
That's already taken care of.
All right. All right. I mean, this is something I'd like to sit down with you as well. I've kind of have it drafted, but to sit down and really address it and see what the numbers are in our overlay fund to make sure that we have the funds necessary to, to pay for these exemptions is important. So, all right.
problem.
Great. Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Nacastro.
Thank you. Mr. O'Donnell, the hour grows late, and so we only have a few more minutes. But I just wondered if you could briefly, for the audience at home, explain why our valuations have increased as reflected on your department's website.
So basically, we're required by Mass General Law, we have to value 100% fair market value. And they review all our data every year, so it's based on sales. Residential properties are just based on sales.
So these increased values that are on the Assessor's Department's website, they're based on the sale of homes in Brockton?
Yeah, we had probably 800 verified single-family sales this year that we utilized, and they have 5 comparable sales that the computer picks. It's all computer generated, but the DOR does check our data and make sure it's accurate.
And you and I have talked about that before. What happens if they determine that your data is not accurate?
You won't get certified, you won't be able to put out your
Right.
third quarter tax bills.
Right, we get whacked, right?
Yeah.
Right, so we don't have a choice. We have to go with that valuation.
Yes. Well, even if we didn't reval every year, as long as the budget's going up, taxes are going to go up.
Right.
The assessments could be the same.
And of course, typically, the budget goes up because everything costs more.
It's going to go up 2.5% typically,
Right.
at least, plus new growth, so.
So the only place where we have leeway is in the rate.
The only way to cut the budget is the only way to lower taxes,
Right. Ultimately,
ultimately.
right. I need people to understand that.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselors, any motions?
Motion to recommend favorably.
Second.
Motion has been properly made and seconded to recommend this item favorably to the full city council. All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Clerk.
Whereas the Brockton City Council granted licenses to individuals and corporations for the retail sales of marijuana, and whereas the licenses were issued pursuant to business plans and official representations made to the council when applicants appeared to participate in the licensing process, and whereas the City Council has an economic interest in ensuring that licensees are open and actively engage retail sales. Now, therefore, be it resolved, 1, the city clerk shall provide a list of all retail marijuana licenses approved by the council with a notation as to which licensees are open and actively engaged in retail sales. 2, the city's chief legal officer, solicitor, and legislative counsel to the city council to be invited to appear at a finance committee meeting to discuss legal options available to the city council relating to those licensees who have failed to open and are simply holding a license. Invited, Tim Cruz, city clerk; Megan Bridges, city solicitor; Shannon Resnick, legislative counsel.
Mr. Clerk, here on your night off.
There are no nights off, serving you, the council. Is there anybody else you want to take out of order, though, or? The extent of my invitation was to give you a list, which I gave to everybody, of the licensees that are current and the status of what they are. By the way, on location for one of those, I put the wrong address. Under Holistic Concepts, the owner's place, his office is West Elm Street, but Holistic Concepts' address is 1915 Main Street, down in the old Kmart Plaza. And if you have any questions on who's open, I'll answer that. Other than that, I think you want to talk to our two attorneys.
Counselor D'Agostino.
Just, and I wasn't here as a counselor when this whole thing happened, so forgive me if I'm lacking in some information that probably my longer-serving colleagues have. So we've basically got, if I'm looking at this right, 5 licenses that are not stores that are open, engaged in the sale of marijuana and producing revenue for the city. Is that correct?
Actually 6, I believe.
Maybe I counted wrong,
counting
6.
wrong?
KG Collective.
I'm sorry, that's true. Seeds of Change does not even have a, has never even moved forward, correct? They have a, they have a certificate from the mayor, but, host agreement, but they've never come to the council, so they don't have a license, correct?
Okay. So you said they have a certificate from the mayor. Does that have a sunset on it?
It's expired.
It's expired, so it's no longer valid. They couldn't show up and say, okay, we want our license now.
It's expired.
Okay. And I guess that's what I wanted to ask is like, what's the time frame? So now we've got some that are paid and they're not open, or some, active no. Like, was there a time frame on those licenses when they were issued where, look, if you're not actively engaged in this business, license is void?
I think that's sort of the million-dollar question, kind of, while we're here. And so to sort of focus the conversation on that aspect, the KG Collective is not open, Terrasol LLC is not open, Elevation Inc., I think Leaf Relief and the Holistic Concepts are the folks who are not open. And then not everyone has the same issue date, but to try and remedy that, the License Commission, the executive assistant for the license department reports to me, and the License Commission is charged essentially with monitoring and renewing licenses after you all grant them. One example is there was somebody in town who sent out a mailer that might have had some obscene content on it, in terms of just the way that they were promoting their business. Nothing erotic. But anyways, so we contacted those folks through the License Commission, sent them a copy of their mailer, talked about what was the issue with it. The License Commission brought them in. They explained the mailer. They explained where they got their data from. So to your point, or to your question, a lot of folks, as you can see on the clerk's chart, you can see when their licenses were granted. And everybody, I would say, was in what I'll call, the very height of COVID. The year from July 2020 to July 2021. So because some folks had different original grant dates, the License Commission is trying to get everybody on the same timeline with renewals, much like other types of renewals are. So this year was our real first chance at that for the most part. So we sent out renewal letters, I believe it was, or the License Commission sent out letters, I believe it was around February. And then, in March 2021, or excuse me, March 2022 is when a lot of folks renewed their license that had been granted initial license by you all, but maybe had never opened yet at that point.
Right.
So between March and April of 2022, 8 folks renewed their license. So the License Commission has those application materials, and there, I think, is a section for each one. The License Commission says, please let us know what your plans are, why haven't you opened yet, what's going to happen. So that's really the current status, I think, is that the License Commission took the perspective that we're going to give these folks a renewal pass because of COVID, and then that is where we are right now. That is where we are right now. All of the people on this sheet that you're looking at, with the exception of Seeds of Change, have active provisional licenses with the CCC.
Okay. How long, I'm sorry, you may have said this, how long is the license good for once issued?
It's good for a year.
1 year, okay.
And according to the city ordinances, not opening according to the timelines set forth in your materials can be a reason for non-renewal or revocation or something like that.
Right.
But like I just mentioned, everybody on this list essentially came in for renewal this year. And as the post-COVID, where are you? And Atlantic Medicinal Partners came in and they opened after they got their renewal. And the Holistic Concepts got their renewal in August. I believe their application material said they were planning to open by the end of the year. Let's see. There was one more in August that was on there. Was that the KG Collective? No.
They haven't gotten their renewal yet.
Right, it was this, oh, I think it was Atlantic Medicinal Partners and the Holistic Concepts. And Atlantic Medicinal Partners did open.
Okay. Right, and I just want to clarify kind of why I'm asking this and where I'm going with it. I don't have a problem with retail marijuana. The voters voted for it. That's the way that is. So, but if you get a license and you sit on it and don't open, it doesn't do anything for the city. You know, like, we get nothing out of issuing a license to somebody who doesn't do anything with it. So I guess that's what when I look at this, and so I'm glad to hear that the License Commission is actively engaged with the folks that haven't opened to say, what are you doing? Are you, and I understand the giving them kind of a pass, right? COVID was a difficult time to run a business as somebody who runs a business. Never mind open a brand new business. So I completely get that, and I think they did the right thing, you know, giving them some leeway there. But I want to make sure that these licenses aren't going to continue to sit dormant when they could maybe go to an organization that's ready to open up and produce some revenue for the city. Because that's, right, we're not getting anything out of these.
Counselor, to your point, for the folks, Terrasol, Elevation, and, well, at least Terrasol and Elevation, for the folks who have not renewed, that was really the initial focus, was let's make sure everybody who was granted a license, if they did not come in and pick up their license and pay their initial license fee, step one, let's start there. So that's what we did. We said, okay, you never picked up or paid for your license. We need your license fee, you need to pick up your license, and you cannot renew until you do those things.
Right.
So that was sort of trying to wind it back up that way. And then Terrasol LLC and Elevation Inc. are, with the exception of Seeds of Change, I don't personally count them, but those two folks are the only ones who didn't respond to correspondence from the License Commission regarding the need to both pay the initial fee and do a renewal.
Okay.
So that is, there's currently a draft letter that I'm calling a final warning right now, that these people will have to come in before the end of the year, or then there's potentially going to be a revocation hearing.
Which brings me to my next point. Thank you for bringing us there. Does this body have the right to revoke a license?
Not, most likely not without License Commission action first.
I see. So walk me through what that would look like, if you wouldn't mind.
It depends on the nature of the violation that the License Commission is bringing them in for, but essentially, if there's going to be a revocation and the License Commission corresponds with the City Council as required by the ordinance via a copy of its communication to the licensee, then the City Council can essentially order these folks in on their own for a show cause hearing, for you all to hear whatever it is the License Commission is bringing them in on. That doesn't give you all authority at that point in time to act on their license. But it does, according to the terms of their license that are incorporated in the ordinance, it gives you all the authority to bring them in for a show cause hearing.
But it sounds like it wouldn't matter if we did that. We could bring them in, we could have the hearing, we could ask them questions, we could go through all of that. And it doesn't really matter, if I'm understanding you right, this body doesn't have the authority to take any meaningful action if we wanted to.
And I can chip in, but that was intentional by this body. When
Okay.
this body was drafting the ordinance back in 2018, the task that the council undertook was review and grant of the initial application.
Okay.
And then everywhere else, it was action by the License Commission with notice to the city council. There's actually language that spells out that the License Commission shall have authority and responsibility for granting renewals, suspending operations and/or sales, issuing summary cease and desist orders, issuing summary suspension orders, complete inspection, enforcing rules, regulations, local ordinances, and state laws pertaining to marijuana establishment licenses. So our ordinance delegated back in 2018, the License Commission to be the one that oversees
Okay.
after we grant the license as a council.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That settles that. Yeah, I mean, again, and I know that, I understand that this is a tough business to get off the ground, right? A significant investment, significant regulation, et cetera. I just, again, I don't want two things. Licenses are being held and not used because, again, like I said earlier, it produces no revenue and no benefit to the city by doing that. And second, a situation where we have licenses being held essentially for sale. Because if I'm the last guy holding a license and I haven't opened yet, boy, that license is going to be worth some bucks. And that's not what we intended either. That does nothing for the city. Well, I shouldn't say we, I wasn't here, but I can't imagine that that was the intention of this council at that time, because it doesn't do anything for the city. So I guess those are the two concerns I have. I guess I'm just making them known. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Farwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very briefly, my concern was different. When we granted these licenses, people stood before us, some of them represented by council, and they made public representations. We are going to be open either within 6 months or by the end of the year, and they are not. And in fact, there may be people who would benefit from having these licenses who are ready to open, who can generate revenue, who can bring additional revenue to the city. And it's, if you haven't opened, it just seems to me you should be brought back in here and asked, why did you tell us that if we grant you the license, you'll be open by the end of 2021 or within 6 months? I mean, I think if we're the licensing authority, the initial licensing authority, then the representations made to us should have some meaning. Otherwise, people can come in here and tell us anything. And I just got to figure that there are people who would love to have one of these licenses that's not being used. Whether you like marijuana or not, I don't care. I don't smoke it. It doesn't matter to me, but it is a revenue generator. So I guess I would say to the solicitor and to our legislative council, I don't know what the License Commission is doing, but we issued the original license, and we did so because we were told certain things. And it's on tape. We're going to be open within 6 months. We're going to be open by the end of the year. And that has not happened. And to me, that's false and deceptive. And that should carry some consequences, and I would leave it up to both of you what those consequences should be. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other counselors? Speak now, forever hold your peace. Madam Solicitor, Attorney Resnick, any remarks, Mr. Clerk, or do we have a motion?
At the end of the year, how about at the end of 2022, I can, in conjunction with the clerk's office, send you an updated list as to these couple holdouts that, and then with sort of a sketch plan for 2023, what the renewal period looks like. And then and I'm sure the License Commission would support it, welcome bringing them in front of you to talk about this type of thing too. The chairman and I work very well together, and this is quite a new area, still, even though we've had it for a long time. The regulations are still changing. The law actually changes November 9th, Wednesday, again. So there's that. But like I said, there's a final warning letter for at least the two who have never paid and never opened. And we have been chipping away at the stone.
And lastly, I'd be interested in what other communities have done, if in fact they've faced the same issue. So thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Azak?
Thank you. So I just, on what our city solicitor just mentioned, I totally agree with you. I think that that's a great idea to come back before us, and definitely to come back with the chairman of the licensing board. I attend many of their meetings, and there's a bit of a disconnect. You know, I think they also, I know with the transfers that happened, the couple of them, they really didn't, the process was a little confusing. So I think if they would come before us, maybe open up the conversation and see how, how we expect or how we think these should be dealt with, I think would be a great idea. So I think that's really what we need to do. Thank you. And with that, I make a motion to recommend favorably back to the full city council.
Second.
Motion has been properly made and seconded. All in favor? All opposed? The motion passes. Councilors, that is the end of our agenda. Does anyone have a moment of privilege? Counselor Azak.
So in honor of Veterans Day this week, I would like to highlight one of our very own residents, Mr. Robert L. McCormack, who wrote a book called Brockton Answers the Call. 16 Brockton veterans share their personal stories of fighting alongside the Allies in World War II. It's absolutely beautiful. I know a few of the gentlemen, and I just opened the book, and there it is, Mr. George Hersey. It highlights a lot of our very own residents, and it's on Amazon. It's not very expensive, but I know he did a beautiful job. We have a lot of talented people in Brockton, so I'd just like to wish everybody a happy Veterans Day.
Reporting
And thank
live.
you to the gentleman who served with us on the council. I know we have a few veterans here as well.
Reporting live from the field, that was Shirley Azak. Counselor Nicastro.
Thank you. 1 year ago, several of our Brockton police officers responded to a dispatch to Tabor Avenue involving gunshots, open fire. The activity that resulted, the activity that happened that day and the bravery of our officers resulted in 4 Brockton police officers being nominated for awards at the 39th Annual Trooper George Hanna Awards for Bravery ceremony that was held recently in Mechanics Hall in Worcester, Massachusetts. It's a really, really big deal because it's an opportunity for the public to recognize the bravery of members of our law enforcement community across the state who put their lives on the line by dedicating themselves to safety. And to our great delight, 2 of our officers, Officers Chris Perez and Robert Otis, received prestigious awards for their outstanding acts of heroism. They received medals of valor last month, and they were awarded these medals by Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito for their bravery and courage last year. In addition, 2 others of our officers, Officer Joe Miranda and Detective Ryan Quirk, were also nominated for these awards. Just the notion of being nominated is a very big deal. And so I want to acknowledge to everyone these selfless acts of bravery made by our men in blue, and congratulate both the nominees and the awardees at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other moments? Being none, we are adjourned.